Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to extend to you a most cordial welcome to the International Conference on Welfare for Holocaust Survivors and Other Victims of Nazi Persecution. This conference is organized by the European Shoah Legacy Institute under the patronage of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor of the Czech Republic. It is also conducted under the patronage of the European Parliament and the European Commission. This conference became possible with the support of the government of Israel, the Jewish Claims Conference, and the Foundation Remembrance, Response and Future, and the constant support from the government of Czech Republic and the United States to the European Shoah Legacy Institute. We are happy that 39 governments were able to join us here today. Besides, we are really happy to welcome here our colleagues from civil society. And today we have 54 organizations who are dealing with providing care to Holocaust survivors and other victims of Nazi persecution. We are particularly grateful to Holocaust survivors, victims of Roma genocide and political prisoners who joined us here. We know that even after 70 years, you still wear the painful scars, both physical and psychological, of the inhuman treatment to which you were subjected. It is our duty to you to provide you with care and justice, and to assure that you enjoy a dignified life. It is absolutely unacceptable that after everything you had to get through in your youth, you often encounter serious deprivation. We consider that it is imperative to respect your personal dignity and to do everything in our power to protect your rights and address your needs, including medical, social, and emotional assistance. National social policies are an important mechanism by which social welfare needs can be addressed. National governments are the primary duty bearers for ensuring basic social and economic rights of their citizens. Where international actors provide assistance, national governments still remain the most important player. Intergovernmental organizations like the European Union, though not dealing directly with the issues of social welfare, have a special role to play in the international community to honor and assist Holocaust survivors and other victims of Nazi persecution, and to prevent resurgence of anti-Semitism and denial of Holocaust and other Nazi crimes. This includes immediate care for particularly needy persons who were victims and became living historical witnesses of Holocaust. Civil society is also playing a crucial role in providing care to Holocaust survivors and other victims of Nazi persecution. It plays an instrumental role in overcoming the social isolation that many continue to experience. It also promotes intergovernmental dialogue and solidarity and helps to keep the issue of welfare for Holocaust survivors and other victims of Nazi persecution high on the national agendas. We gathered here today to discuss the best practices and policies in addressing the needs of Holocaust survivors and other victims of Nazi persecution. The survivors are not getting younger. Their needs are here and now, and we gathered here to discuss them. These are the questions we will try to answer in the next few days. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 exciting days full of work lie ahead. I wish us all fruitful discussion and elaboration to concrete steps that will help us to ensure that Holocaust survivors and other victims of Nazi persecution enjoyed a dignified life. Thank you. The next speaker I would like to invite is Minister of Social Affairs and Labor of the Czech Republic, the initiator of this conference, whose personal involvement with the issue of care for Holocaust survivors played a crucial role for making this gathering possible. Ms. Michaela Marksová.
Dobrý den, vážené dámy, vážení pánové, přeživší excelence. Je mi osobně velkou ctí, že mohu zahájit tuto konferenci, která je věnovaná péči o přeživší holokaust a ostatní oběti nacistické perzekuce. A ctí je mi to o to větší, že se této akce účastní kromě zástupců Evropské komise, národních států, státních institucí i neziskových organizací, také ti, kterým má být tato péče a zájem věnovány. Jsem také ráda, že se konference koná v tento rok, v rok významného 70. výročí konce druhé světové války, kde bezprecedentní tragédie holokaustu a ostatní nacistické zločiny a následný záměr zaručit, aby se tyto hrůzy již nikdy neopakovaly, staly základním kamenem jak pozdější evropské integrace, tak také upevňování demokratických systémů v jednotlivých státech. Nicméně ani 70 let po válce, jak všichni víme, není vyhráno a v současné době nám rostoucí extremistické a i výslovně antisemitické tendence ve společnosti ukazují, že máme v Evropě pořád na čem pracovat. A přitom máme jedinečnou příležitost využít té zkušenosti přeživších holokaustu a ostatních obětí nacistické perzekuce a jejich společného odkazu, abychom společně prosazovali principy tolerance, rozmanitosti a mezikulturního dialogu, ale využít je musíme také k obraně základních demokratických hodnot, které jsou v současné době občas zpochybňovány. A v neposlední řadě podmínky, v nichž naši přeživší žijí, a ta míra důstojnosti a respektu, která je jim projevována, kterou jsme schopni jim zaručit, je samozřejmě vizitkou nás všech. Proto bych pro tyto 2 dny ráda konferenci popřála konstruktivní a inspirativní diskuzi, a to nejen o aktuálních potřebách přeživších, ale také o možných příkladech dobré praxe a jejich sdílení, tak abychom všichni se ctí obstáli výzvám současným i budoucím. A ještě bohužel úplně na závěr, já se musím moc omluvit, jakkoliv jsem se na tuto konferenci velice těšila a rezervovala si čas ve svém kalendáři, tak politické dění s tím trochu zamíchalo. Já budu odsud bohužel muset velice brzo odejít do parlamentu, do poslanecké sněmovny, kde dnes opozice vyjadřuje nedůvěru vládě a já tam musím být fyzicky přítomná, ale když mi to ten čas dovolí a nebude tam ta diskuze probíhat moc dlouho, tak se aspoň vrátím na tu večerní akci a případně se k vám vrátím zítra. Takže ještě jednou moc děkuji všem účastníkům a účastnicím, moc držím palce vašemu jednání a na viděnou.
Thank you very much, Minister. And our next speaker is Mr. Jakub Kulhánek, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic. Over the years, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs proved its sincere dedication and commitment to keeping the memory of the past alive by raising awareness of the atrocities committed during the Nazi regime and helping survivors to live their lives in dignity and with respect. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been extremely supportive to the European Shoah Legacy Institute's initiative, and from the very first moment provided us with their technical and political assistance. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jakub Kulhánek.
Vážení přeživší, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, an especially warm welcome to the survivors of Nazi persecution who have joined us for today's conference. I'm immensely honored that I can welcome you here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic on the occasion of the International Conference on Welfare for Holocaust survivors and other victims of Nazi persecution. It is a somber reminder of historical tragedies and perhaps the great irony of history that this very building once housed the Reich Protector Office led by Reinhard Heydrich, one of the main masterminds of Holocaust. For quite a long time, the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been quite active in the field of Holocaust legacy. Let me remind you of the 2012 Immovable Property Restitution Conference or the 2009 Holocaust Era Conference, which both took place here in Prague. Following the latter one, the European Shoah Legacy Institute was established by the Czech government, and the institute is the main organizer of today's conference. For historical reasons, the Czech Republic enjoys a comparatively low level of anti-Semitism. Our citizens of Jewish origin have been traditionally deeply integrated into the society, and we are very grateful for the long-lasting contribution of our fellow Jewish citizens to our society. Therefore, it is not a coincidence that our survivors of Nazi persecution, both Jewish and non-Jewish, have often found their way to the same associations where they work together to honor and empower the victims of Nazi persecution. This demonstrates a high level of mutual solidarity. It is not something initiated or even imposed by the government, but rather it is this sense of togetherness that unites our survivors of Nazi persecution in pursuing the same goals and interests. Now, 70 years after the end of the Second World War, the Czech government and all other concerned governments must strive to improve the well-being of the survivors of Nazi persecution, be they of Jewish, Roma, or other origins, and ensure that for the remaining years of their lives, they will live in dignity. I would like to thank you on behalf of the Czech Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lubomír Zaorálek, for your participation in this conference. I hope that we should all, governments as well as non-governmental organizations, join forces and contribute to the improvement of living conditions of those who suffered the most terrible mistreatment in the human history. On that note, I wish you a productive and successful conference. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is co-chair of this conference, Ambassador Stuart Eizenstat, a former Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, Under-Secretary of State for Economic Affairs, Ambassador to the European Union, Special Advisor on Holocaust issues to President Clinton, a founding father and a member of the Honorary Board of the European Shoah Legacy Institute, whose relentless efforts to obtain compensation and restitution for Holocaust victims and for non-Jewish forced laborers, particularly in Eastern Europe, elicited admiration and gratitude.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. And as I look out on this audience, I see many familiar faces. And it's not a coincidence, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs mentioned, that we're having this conference in Prague. In 2009, in June, we had a 5-day conference on social welfare benefits, art restitution, communal property, and a whole range of other issues resulting in the Terezin Declaration. In 2010, also in June, we developed what was called the best practices and guidelines for the restitution and compensation of real immovable property confiscated by the Nazis and their allies between 1933 and 1945. And here we are now in 2015 again in Prague. It's a great tribute to your people, to your government, and to your commitment. And it's very heartfelt. We really are here to continue what I call the unfinished business of World War II. And as I look out and see so many familiar faces, the ambassador from Greece who's been here, Ambassador Spirosino-Thili, the human rights ambassador from France, with whom I've just negotiated a major agreement for the deportation of Jews and others on the French railway that's now making its way through the National Assembly. So many of you have been involved in so many ways. It's a particular honor to represent my country and to co-chair this important international conference on the welfare needs of Holocaust survivors and other victims of Nazi persecution. I want to thank my colleague Elizabeth Nakian, who's the Deputy Director of the Office of Holocaust Issues at State, and I particularly also want to thank Ambassador Shapiro, our U.S. Ambassador to the Czech Republic, for coming and for his interest. And here again, it's life coming full circle. His mother was born here in 1934 in Prague, was fortunate to get out in 1938, and he's told me just this morning that his uncle will be visiting him shortly. It's a great tribute to, I think, the tenacity of survivors and to the United States and to the Czech Republic that we now have an ambassador with this history, and it really is very moving to have you here and to have you representing our country to this great country. The ambassador, I want to mention also the Foreign Affairs Minister, noted the location of this. It is noteworthy that this is taking place in the palace, which was the SS headquarters from 1939 to 1945. Acting Reichsprotector for Bohemia and Moravia, Reinhard Heydrich, was one of the darkest figures of the Nazi elite, and that's a pretty high standard to have to meet. Upon his arrival in Prague, Heydrich sought to eliminate opposition to the Nazi occupation by deporting and executing members of the Czech resistance and suppressing Czech culture. He oversaw the deportation of Jews to concentration camps and the transformation of the fortress town of Terezin into a ghetto way station for Jewish families. We had the closing ceremony for our 2009 conference at Terezin, and that's been a transformative part of my life because we saw there, organized by the Czech government, a concert drama called Defiant Requiem, Verity at Terezin, which honors a Jewish prisoner chorus that was organized by Raphael Schechter, and it's a demonstration of the courage of survivors of using the arts and music to resist the Nazis. And I want to tell you that one of those people who was featured in the concert drama, which we've taken literally all over the world, is Felix Kolmer, and Felix is here with us today. Heydrich gave a speech in this very room, this great hall, in which he addressed what he called the final solution and the final task of, quote unquote, the Czech question. It was beyond just the Jews of Czech. It was to wipe out Czech culture and Czech history. The fact that we're here today to honor and find ways to assist the victims of this darkest chapter in world history and in Czech history is no small irony. Just as it is with the ambassador, with history coming full circle for Ambassador Shapiro, it's history coming full circle here in this very hall. I want to commend and thank the European Shoah Legacy Institute, in particular, Director Halyna Senyk and her wonderful staff for the tireless work that she and they have done to organize this conference, and express my deepest appreciation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs of the Czech Republic for their leadership and patronage. A particular thanks to my co-chair and, may I say, longtime friend, Jiří Šitler. I want to acknowledge his commitment over many years to this really sacred mission, and to acknowledge also the financial support and expertise provided by the EVZ Foundation. This foundation, this German foundation, was created as part of our slave labor agreement in the year 2000. And it was at the insistence of the private corporations in Germany and the German government, when we negotiated this $5 billion slave labor agreement, that there be a foundation that went beyond the payment of funds directly to survivors, that would contribute to the memory and lessons of the Holocaust. And so it's so special that the EVZ Foundation has been one of the contributors, as is the Jewish Material Claims Against Germany. Greg Schneider, their director, is here, and I have the privilege of also negotiating on their behalf for Germany for annual compensation. Without all of these combined efforts and hard work, we'd not be here today to find immediate, realistic, and targeted ways to help victims of Nazi persecution, who are the most vulnerable and needy of the aging populations in Europe and around the world. It's estimated that there are approximately 500,000 Holocaust survivors dispersed around the world, about 110,000 in the United States, and over 187,000 in Israel. And may I say that it's especially meaningful to have the Israeli Ambassador for Human Rights and Holocaust Issues and Anti-Semitism here. Tabor, thank you for being here. The average age of Holocaust survivors is estimated to be about 82 years of age. As a result of wartime and post-war experiences, these are people who are confronting stresses, challenges, and needs that are often more acute than others in their age group. They have greater health needs than the general population, and they're more susceptible to certain illnesses. Holocaust survivors are also significantly more likely to live in poverty and social isolation, deprived of family and social support networks by the losses they sustained in the Holocaust, having no extended families now after the war. So although the total population of Holocaust survivors is obviously decreasing, and decreasing by a rate of 5 to 7% a year, the number of survivors in need of service and assistance is growing because they become more frail and more needy. It's incumbent upon governments, particularly in those countries where the Holocaust decimated once thriving Jewish communities, and where remaining Jewish communities and other victims are struggling to survive, to examine mechanisms, programs, and services to help these survivors. It's a matter of urgency to help those who suffered so grievously in their youth to live out the end of their lives in dignity and comfort. It is absolutely, as Halyna said, unacceptable that those who suffered so grievously in their youth should have to live out their declining years in poverty and deprivation. Support for Holocaust survivors from the very top is essential. I want to thank those countries that already have national compensation programs or special benefits or initiatives for survivors and other victims of Nazi persecution. I urge those that do not have such programs to learn over the next few days from some of the best practices that we will hear about over the next 2 days and to take steps to adopt such practices at home. We're not working on a blank slate. There are many countries that have already adopted practices that could be followed by others, and even those practices can be enhanced. There's no singular prescription. There are many different approaches compatible with your own national laws that can be considered. I want to mention a recent and very positive initiative taken by the Obama administration. In December 2013, the Obama White House announced for the first time an initiative to focus on the health and social service needs of survivors living in the U.S. Our best estimates that in the United States of America, with all of our wealth, about 25% of Holocaust survivors live in poverty. And I've just come back from a Defiant Requiem concert in New York, in Lincoln Center, where we raised about $2 million for survivors. Would you believe that in New York City, perhaps the wealthiest city in the world, where there are 60,000 Holocaust survivors, that 50% of those 60,000 either live in poverty or within 50% of the federal poverty level? The administration wants to build on the efforts of the various organizations that have been serving this community for years and to help this population with dignity and support. The initiative the administration has announced includes the following: the appointment of a special envoy, Aviva Suffren, for U.S. Holocaust Survivor Services, and Aviva is lodged at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. This special envoy serves as an advocate for the supportive service needs of Holocaust survivors living in the United States. She raises awareness about the issue across the government and with American nonprofit organizations, foundations, and the private sector, and explores domestic opportunities to generate additional support for Holocaust survivors in the U.S. The establishment of a program that uses national volunteer service resources to build capacity in nonprofit organizations that serve survivors is another facet of this program. And last, the exploration of public-private partnership opportunities with foundations, nonprofits, and the private sector is designed to increase resources and leverage those capabilities to support survivors living in the U.S. In this connection, I'd like to mention that the Obama administration's federal funding initiative for fiscal 2015 is a $5 million fund to help provide supportive services for survivors living in the U.S. In the final budget passed by Congress, they appropriated, and we've never done this before. So I'm not pointing fingers at other countries. Many of you have done more and earlier than we have. But in our final budget, Congress appropriated $2.5 million to help provide supportive services for aging survivors living in the U.S. These funds will be awarded through a competitive grant-making process this very year. Now, there are a couple of other things that can be done very simply by your countries. And here we are perhaps a leader. And that is on the issue of taxation of benefits. Taxation of benefits affects the quality of life for survivors around the world. In the U.S., Holocaust restitution payments are not taxed at either the federal level or by most of our 50 states. These include payments made by any country, it could be Germany, Austria, France, or any other entity because of persecution of an individual on the basis of race, religion, physical or mental disability. Tax-free payments include compensation for property losses resulting from Nazi persecution, including insurance policies issued before and during World War II by European insurance companies. Also, restitution payments are not counted in determining eligibility for federal or federally assisted needs-based programs, like, for example, our Medicaid program or food stamps. So in other words, you will not be somehow ineligible and be over the line because your payments will not be counted toward that eligibility criteria. As we have a full two-day program ahead with many speakers and best practices to discuss, permit me to conclude by asking you to join the U.S. in thanking ESLI and the Czech government for its leadership in supporting and assisting this conference to help ensure that it is a substantive and productive meeting. There are 34 countries represented here, and it's a great achievement. I'd also like to urge organizations, NGOs, and the 47 countries that endorsed the 2009 Terezin Declaration, and now the 34 or 35 countries participating here, to support ESLI politically and financially. The U.S. government has provided support for 5 years now for ESLI, as have other governments, Israeli government, of course, the Czech government. This is a tremendously important institution, and even a modest amount of support from your governments will go a long way so they can carry on their important work. Jiří and I will have a co-chair's statement that we'll issue at the end of the conference. That has been, I understand, circulated in draft form to many of you, and we would welcome any comments that you have, but it will place our mark as co-chairs on the important work that you're doing. So thank you for coming, and I look forward to participating in this very important conference.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Eizenstat. I just wanted to add one thing, that the number of delegates and countries represented here is 39. Very few joined us very last moment, and we are very grateful for your interest and support and for being here today. Our next speaker is Ambassador Jiří Šitler, who is co-chair of this conference. He's also Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues and Combat Anti-Semitism. He dealt with World War II-related issues since 1990s. As press and foreign policy advisor to President Václav Havel, as head of the Czech delegation at the 1998 Washington Conference on Holocaust-era assets, observer in the International Commission on Holocaust-era insurance claims, ambassador at large for World War II-related issues, and chief negotiator for compensation of Czech Nazi victims. Jiří Šitler is also founding member of the Board of Trustees of the German Federal Foundation Remembers, Responsibility and Future, or otherwise known as FOC Stiftung. Ladies and gentlemen, Jiří Šitler.
Thank you. Dear ministers, dear deputy minister, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear co-chair, vážení přeživší a pamětníci druhé světové války. It's a great honor to preside over this conference with such a distinguished person like Ambassador Stuart Eizenstat, whom I personally know as a dedicated champion of the justice for Nazi victims since the 1998 Washington conference. The issues we are going to discuss is of utmost urgency and importance. The survivors are in advanced age and they need our support now. Sadly, 70 years after the experience of the Second World War, we have to face, as other speakers already mentioned, not only social problems of Nazi victims, but also rising levels of anti-Semitism and denial of Holocaust and other Nazi crimes throughout Europe. Only a few weeks ago, when an otherwise respectable newspaper, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, described the May Days in the Czech lands in 1945, the article did not mention death marches of camp inmates in the last days of war. It didn't mention Holocaust. It didn't mention the plans for the genocide of the Czech nation announced in this very hall by the infamous Reinhard Heydrich, but it described the May uprising against Germans as an act of unexplainable revenge after years of calm and security in the so-called protectorate. Taking into account these developments, it is good that this conference is held not only under the auspices of Minister Zaorálek and Minister Marksová, but also under the patronage of the President of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, and the Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans. European integration started in order to overcome the hatred and unspeakable crimes of the Second World War. It is important for Europe to remember its own roots, the roots of its own integration, and to take care that the crimes of the past are not denied and repeated again, and that the survivors are paid respect. And I'm convinced that thanks to the organizers of the conference, the team of the European Shoah Legacy Institute, but also of the Central Europe Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including Director Tomáš Kafka and Mr. Jan Kreuter, we will be able to make important steps towards this aim. So thank you all for being here, and I'm looking forward to the conference.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Professor of Law, former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Ambassador of the Czech Republic to the Council of Europe, and former Minister and Chairman of the Legislative Council of the Czech Republic, and currently Chair of its Committee on Legal Affairs of the Committee on Legal Affairs of the European Parliament, Pavel Svoboda.
Dear co-chairs, excellencies, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you for inviting me to speak up at this very important conference. I will not speak only as a member of the European Parliament, but also as a member of the Czech Christian Democratic Party, who is forming currently the coalition in the government, and therefore it is responsible for the steps that need to be carried out in the Czech Republic as far as the topic of this conference is concerned. This year we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, and it is therefore a high time to do as much as possible to improve the welfare of the Holocaust survivors. They get older, as we do, and their community decreases. There are some 2,000 to 3,000 of them these days in the Czech Republic. As other EU member states concerned, the Czech Republic has considerably helped to the Holocaust survivors. However, this kind of assistance or support came rather late compared to other countries of the western side of the former Iron Curtain. The first attempt after 1989 was enacted only 5 years after that on the provision of a lump sum to certain victims of Nazi persecution. With the time, the group of those who were entitled to any kind of compensation has enlarged, yet those who are not entitled to any kind of compensation or assistance from the Czech state are still quite numerous. These elderly people are partly disadvantaged in our social system. They are often in poor health due to the hardships undergone during the war years, not to talk about the worsening financial situation of the retired eldest generation group in general. I therefore urge those who represent the Czech government to search urgently for ways how to provide for better access to social and health care to them. Those who receive any kind of compensation are often not entitled to ordinary allowances from the social scheme since they overpass the necessary threshold. Having a close look at examples of best practices from other countries, I think it is necessary to search for ways how to equalize different groups of Holocaust survivors and victims of Nazi persecution with respect to entitlement to any kind of social or financial assistance from the Czech state. To set up a volunteer assistance network on the Czech national level, or even a general voluntary donors fund to which companies as well as individuals may contribute to. All this in order to avoid that the Holocaust survivors fall into social isolation since they lost their white families during the war years or their families fled from the territory of the Czech Republic abroad shortly after the Second World War. Also, in order to allow them to benefit from the standards of social and health care equal to those in other EU member states. In this respect, for assistance, for instance, home care is seen as more advantageous compared to institutionalized care. And also, lastly, in order to allow them to spend the last years of their lives with dignity and in a friendly, ideally home environment. Time is flying. The generation of those who have survived for better future in our country, or simply because of, the generation of those who have suffered for better future in our country, or simply because of their origin, is slowly leaving us for good. Any improvement we may achieve in this regard will be only a small gest of gratitude towards them. There's nothing to wait for. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Svoboda. Our next speaker is Hugo Marom, who was rescued from imminent death as a Jewish child in Winton Kindertransport in 1939. In the aftermath of the Second World War, he became a pilot and volunteered for flying duties with the Israeli Air Force. And he was put in charge of airfields in the southern Negev region. Following the communist takeover of Czechoslovakia in 1968, Mr. Marom settled in Israel, where he lives these days.
Ladies and gentlemen, which includes everyone who is here and those who will get to hear of this conference later. As I was brought up in this country, born in Brno, I could speak in Czech, but then having received a good Kinderstube, I must use the new lingua franca, which is English. I could speak in Hebrew thanks to the fact that in 1948, when Israel was fighting for its independence alone against 5 Arab armies, the only country in the world that supplied arms, aircraft, and training in spite of the UN embargo was Czechoslovakia, the country of my ancestors. Had we not received this help, there would not have been an Israel, and I would not be standing here or sitting here so claimed Mr. Ben-Gurion, our first Prime Minister. It is an honor to be able to address this conference, especially when comparing myself to the specialists and experience gathered here. I feel for having been a bystander to those who were in concentration camps. I still claim being able to better relate to Holocaust survivors than all, I repeat, all of us here, who can be said, like me, are survivors of the great biblical flood, the Mabul, or more recently, survivors of the Far East tsunami. I am a survivor of the Holocaust, but not as a survivor of concentration camps. As my late wife Martha, she went from Auschwitz to 5 more camps, followed by a death march of over 1,000 kilometers from Riga, Latvia, to a camp southwest of Berlin. I was saved by my parents' courage to send my brother and I on Winton's trains to England. An unparalleled sacrifice to all those parents who had the fortitude to send their children to an unknown country without a language, to unknown homes, without mobile phones, and air letters taking a month or more to arrive. There can be no doubt that had it not been for the likes of Nicholas Winton, Bill Barazetti, Trevor Chadwick, Martin Blake, and many others, the Czech Kindertransport of 669 children would not have been possible after the UK government was left with thousands of children from Germany and Austria without foster homes. But how dare we refer to the above-mentioned facilitators as facilitators, I speak of those who arrange the Kindertransport, as heroes of the Kindertransport, when all of us who have children just try to visualize the personal sacrifice, unbelievable agony and moral strength it took for a mother and father to see their children off when no one in the wildest imagination could foresee the bestiality of the Nazi system and the final solution decided on at the Wannsee Conference. They, the parents of the entire Kindertransport, deserve that we all contribute to the erection of a memorial already approved by the Czech government in Prague, from where the last train left a month before World War II, a monument to the only heroes of this heroic episode in the annals of human endeavor. I apologize for sidetracking from the issues of this conference, but without mentioning the children of the Kindertransport who became orphans at the average age of 9, if not the majority forever, as my brother and I, then for at least the 6 years of the war, for a very few lucky ones. For 40 years of our 65 years of marriage, as most survivors, we did not discuss the Holocaust. I felt I was lucky to have been sent to England when I was nearly 11. My brother was 9.5. Martha, my wife, whose entire family went to Auschwitz 5 years later in 1944 when she was 16, survived the ordeal with her sister and mother, considered herself far luckier than I, who became an orphan at the age of 11 and was not left in the hands of an aunt, grandmother, or other family member, but moved from one unknown home to another, wondering what is happening with them, our parents. For the purpose of putting my suggestion to this conference, I have arbitrarily categorized survivors into a few groups. Those that don't want anything from Germany. Some of them are not in need, others are in need. The second group, those concentration camp survivors who need assistance. Some of them are able to apply, most of them unable to apply. The third group, those indirectly affected, not concentration camp inmates. Where do you go for help? Know where to go. Those who initially refused help, gave up trying, now live in need, failed in more than 2 attempts with wrong lawyers and so on. Those who receive partial and inadequate reparations think that's all they're going to get, but are still in need, never told how much really is due to them. And next and finally, the next of kin, dependents born to those survivors, don't know if and how much is due to them, don't know where to go. It is my suggestion and plea for a way to be found whereby the remaining survivors, their children and grandchildren, will not have to write, apply, and fill in forms, pages and pages, go to lawyers or counselors, but reorganize the whole issue of compensation by having well-meaning, well-briefed, and authoritative officials visit the survivors and their next of kin in their homes, and without checking their economical status, be in a position to justly compensate them on the spot. Provide pensions transferable to the next of kin of a one-time sum, depending on the choice of the survivors. This system must take into account and accept the fact that there will be individuals who will make unjustified claims, but on the whole, I believe that long-term employment of officials in the present system, together with embezzlement, will waste more of the limited resources available. I wish this conference Godspeed to find the right answers to the existing, in my opinion, totally inadequate system.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, our last speaker for this session is EU Commissioner for Justice, Consumers' Rights and Gender Equality, Ms. Vera Jourova. The Commissioner has been playing a very important role in combating anti-Semitism in the European Union, and in cooperation with the Vice President Frans Timmermans, is responsible for steering the European Commission actions, which, among other issues, include Holocaust remembrance. So your attention, please. Unfortunately, Ms. Vera Jourova wasn't able to join us herself, so we will have video now. Thank you.